This is my first video I'm ever really doing for YouTube, and I'm doing The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, a guide to spiritual enlightenment. And I get it. I really get it. This book. Okay, sorry, I'm kind of nervous right now. This book, what it did for me was, well, now I know that it is called Kundalini Awakening. I believe that's what it did for me. I felt tingling in my crown chakra. There really aren't any words to describe what it's done for me. And for some reason, I get it. I understand it more so, I think, than most. And I'm not quite sure why that is. Maybe because I'm an empath. Maybe because I'm one of those light star worker being persons. I don't know. But, oh, great. No, wait. Stop that.
You got it siphoned.
I'm recording right now, so. What? Lighter? So I've been reading some of it to my boyfriend, and, well, we are on page 13, but, I will start with, you are not your mind, but I am going to say the last sentence of the introduction. So actually, I am at the beginning, but I will read the introduction later, because I don't want to repeat it, because of him. Oh, I'm saying I don't want to repeat it. So, but I'm going to have to repeat a page or two, so you can go ahead and do whatever. Okay. What?
Okay, charity. Hey.
What?
But they're that's who you're talking to. More than you out here.
I am. Until I get to the part, because I have to explain it to you too. Okay.
Can you give me a cue when I can talk?
So, shall I? Yes, I think I will start with the introduction. The origin of this book. I have little use for the past and rarely think about it. However, I would briefly like to tell you how I came to be a spiritual teacher and how this book came into existence. Until my 30th year, I lived in a state of almost continuous anxiety interspersed with periods of suicidal depression, which, I don't know about you, but I go through. It feels now as if I am talking about some past lifetime or somebody else's life. One night, not long after my 29th birthday, I woke up in the early hours with a feeling of absolute dread. I had woken up with such a feeling many times before, but this time it was more intense than it had ever been. The silence of the night, the vague outlines of the furniture in the dark room, the distant noise of a passing train, everything felt so alien, so hostile, and so utterly meaningless that it created in me a deep loathing of the world. The most loathsome thing of all, however, was my own existence. What was the point in continuing to live with this burden of misery? I've felt like this many times. Why carry on with this continuous struggle? Why? What's the point? I could feel that a deep longing for annihilation. For non-existence was now becoming much stronger than the instinctive desire to continue to live. Quote, I cannot live with myself any longer. This was the thought that kept repeating itself in my mind. Then suddenly I became aware of what a peculiar thought it was. Quote, am I one or two? If I cannot live with myself, there must be two of me, the I and the self, that I cannot live with. Maybe, I thought, only one of them is real. I was so stunned by this strange realization that my mind stopped. I was fully conscious, but there were no more thoughts. This I want to highlight. This part's very important. I was fully conscious, but there were no more thoughts. That part's important because it's all about not having any thoughts inside of your head. Believe it or not, you don't need to think. You just need to be. That's all. Everything else flows naturally. And most of the thoughts, 99% of the thoughts you have, aren't even original. They are repetitive thoughts. They're thoughts about your past. They're thoughts about your future. They're worrying. They're words or sentences that have been repeated in your head that you've heard from somewhere else, from an advertisement, or from something a friend said, or your mom said, or whatever. It's not original thinking. It's just bullshit going on inside your head. It's called the ego, and it stops source energy from coming and flowing through you. It literally blocks it. So when he says, I was fully conscious, but there were no more thoughts, that's very important. Then I felt drawn into what seemed like a vortex of energy. Okay, being drawn into a vortex of energy, it's like going into a portal. It was a slow movement at first and then accelerated. I was gripped by an intense fear and my body started to shake. I heard the words, resist nothing. So what's happening here is he's having an out-of-body experience, fully conscious. I heard the words resist nothing as if spoken inside my chest. I could feel myself being sucked into a void. It felt as if the void was inside myself rather than outside. That's key. Suddenly, there was no more fear, and I let myself fall into that void. I have no recollection of what happened after that. And I can also kind of explain a bit of that because when you teleport, for example, your first time teleporting, you won't remember it because your brain cannot literally understand the concept. You will remember sometime later afterward what happened when you teleported, but the first few times you generally don't remember, and I can get into that later. But so I believe that's why he doesn't remember his first out-of-body experience, but then he does. I was awakened by the chirping of a bird outside the window. I had never heard such a sound before. My eyes were still closed, and I saw the image of a precious diamond. Yes, if a diamond could make a sound, this is what it would be like. I opened my eyes. The first light of dawn was filtering through the curtains. Without any thought, I knew, that there is infinitely more to light than we realize. That soft luminosity filtering through the curtains was love itself. Tears came into my eyes. I got up and walked around the room. I recognized the room, and yet I knew that I had never truly seen it before. Everything was fresh and pristine, as if it had just come into existence. I picked up things, a pencil, an empty bottle, marveling at the beauty and aliveness of it all. That day, I walked around the city in utter amazement at the miracle of life on earth, as if I had just been born into this world. And for the next 5 months, I lived in a state of uninterrupted deep peace and bliss. After that, it diminished somewhat in intensity, or perhaps it just seemed to because it became my natural state. I could still function in the world, although I realized that nothing I ever did could possibly add anything to what I already had. I knew, of course, that something profoundly significant had happened to me, but I didn't understand it at all. It wasn't until several years later, after I had read spiritual texts and spent time with spiritual teachers, that I realized that what everybody was looking for had already happened to me. I understood that the intense pressure of suffering that night must have forced my consciousness to withdraw from its identification with the unhappy and deeply fearful self, which is ultimately a fiction of the mind. This withdrawal must have been so complete that this false, suffering self immediately collapsed, just as if a plug had been pulled out of an inflatable toy. What was left then was my true nature as the ever-present I am. I am. Consciousness in its pure state prior to identification with form. That's what I am is, when it's just simply I am. It's consciousness in its pure state prior to identification with form. Sorry, the camera stopped. It got me all messed up. Form is physical. Yeah, it is. Later, I also learned to go into... Okay, here, this is very important. Later, I also learned to go into that inner, timeless, and deathless realm that I had originally perceived as a void and remain fully conscious. Okay, let's talk about that. He learned how to go into the inner timeless and deathless realm that he had originally perceived as a void and remained fully conscious. So this is why Eckhart Tolle is so amazing, because he is the ultimate master. Okay, he can go out of body, fully conscious. Okay, not in a meditative state, not while sleeping, not while dreaming, while fully conscious. He can go out of body, which means he could be talking to you. He could go out of body, see into the future, and then tell you what will happen. Or he could go out of body while talking to you and tell you about your past lives or who your spirit guides are. Anything's possible. There's no limits. There's no limits. I dwelt in states of such indescribable bliss and sacredness that even the original experience I just described pales in comparison. A time came when, for a while, I was left with nothing on the physical plane. So why would you want to stay on the physical plane when you could go explore all the other planes, all the astral planes? You wouldn't. If you had that capability, you would do nothing but be exploring all the planets, the universes, the creatures, the beings, the planes, the everything. I had no relationships, no job, no home, no socially defined identity. I spent almost 2 years sitting on park benches in a state of the most intense joy. Because he was simply sitting there, but he was out of body. But even the most beautiful experiences come and go. More fundamental, perhaps, than any experience is the undercurrent of peace that has never left me since then. Sometimes it is very strong, almost palpable, and others can feel it too. At other times it is somewhere in the background, like a distant melody. Later, people would occasionally come up to me and say, "I want what you have. Can you give it to me or show me how to get it?" And I would say, "You have it already. You just can't feel it because your mind is making too much noise." That answer later grew into the book that you are holding in your hands. Before I knew it, I had an external identity again. I had become a spiritual teacher. The truth that is within you. This book represents the essence of my work, as far as it can be conveyed in words. With individuals and small groups of spiritual seekers during the past 10 years in Europe and in North America, in deep love and appreciation, I would like to thank those exceptional people for their courage, their willingness to embrace inner change, their challenging questions, and their readiness to listen. This book would not have come into existence without them. They belong to what is as yet a small but fortunately growing minority of spiritual pioneers, people who are reaching a point where they become capable of breaking out of inherited collective mind patterns that have kept humans in bondage to suffering for eons. Yeah. I trust that this book will find its way to those who are ready for such radical inner transformation and so act as a catalyst for it. I also hope that it will reach many others who will find its content worthy of consideration, although they may not be ready to fully live or practice it. It is possible that at a later time the seed that was sown when reading this book will merge with the seed of enlightenment that each human being carries within, and suddenly that seed will sprout and come alive within them. The book, in its present form, originated often spontaneously in response to questions asked by individuals in seminars, meditation classes, and private counseling sessions, and so I have kept the question and answer format. I learned and received as much in those classes and sessions as the questioners. Some of the questions and answers I wrote down almost verbatim, others are generic, which is to say I combined certain types of questions that were frequently asked into one and extracted the essence from different answers to form one generic answer. Sometimes, in the process of writing, an entirely new answer came that was more profound or insightful than anything I had ever uttered. Some additional questions were asked by the editor so as to provide further clarification of certain points. You will find that from the first to the last page, the dialogues continuously alternate between two different levels. On one level, I draw your attention to what is false in you. I speak of the nature of human unconsciousness and dysfunction, as well as its most common behavioral manifestations, from conflict in relationships to warfare between tribes or nations. Such knowledge is vital, for unless you learn to recognize the false, as not you, there can be no lasting transformation, and you would always end up being drawn back into illusion and into some form of pain. That's very important because you can know all this stuff, but then you can also forget it too, because as he says later on, the ego is very clever and tricky, and it likes to trick you into identifying with it again. On this level, I also show you how not to make that which is false in you into a self and into a personal problem, for that is how the false perpetuates itself. On another level, I speak of a profound transformation of human consciousness, not as a distant future possibility, but available now, no matter who or where you are. You are shown how to free yourself from enslavement to the mind. Enter into this enlightened state of consciousness and sustain it in everyday life. On this level of the book, the words are not always concerned with information, but often designed to draw you into this new consciousness as you read. Again and again I endeavor to take you with me into that timeless state of intense conscious presence in the now, capitalized now, so as to give you a taste of enlightenment. Until you are able to experience what I speak of, you may find those passages somewhat repetitive. As soon as you do, however, I believe you will realize that they contain a great deal of spiritual power, and they may become for you the most rewarding parts of the book. Moreover, since every person carries a seed of enlightenment within, I often address myself to the knower in you, who dwells behind the thinker, the deeper self that immediately recognizes spiritual truth, resonates with it, and gains strength from it. The pause symbol after certain passages is a suggestion that you may want to stop reading for a moment, become still, and feel and experience the truth of what has just been said. There may be other places in the text where you will do this naturally and spontaneously. Obviously, you can pause this video and do that. As you begin reading the book, the meaning of certain words, such as being or presence, which are capitalized in the book, may not be entirely clear to you at first. Just read on. Questions or objections may occasionally come into your mind as you read. They will probably be answered later in the book, or they may turn out to be irrelevant as you go more deeply into the teaching and into yourself. Also, you can ask me questions or comments, obviously, and I will do my best to answer them. Don't read with the mind only. Hopefully, if you're listening to this, it's because you not learn, but take information in better when hearing it versus reading it. Don't read with the mind only. Watch out for any, quote, feeling response as you read. A feeling response, and a sense of recognition from deep within. Okay? A sense of recognition from deep within. Because I cannot tell you any spiritual truth that deep within you don't know already. Okay? I cannot tell you any spiritual truth that deep within you don't know already. So you will start to recognize the truth, and it will resonate. All I can do is remind you of what you have forgotten. Living knowledge, ancient and yet ever new, is then activated and released from within every cell of your body. This is also scientifically true. Living knowledge, ancient and yet ever new, is then activated and released from within every cell of your body, because your DNA is encoded with codes. And when you're reminded of the truth which has been taken from you, okay, because we've been ingrained with non-truths our whole life. Don't get me started on that. And that's what he's talking about when he says, breaking out of inherited collective mind patterns that have kept humans in bondage to suffering for eons. Okay, and activated and released from within every cell of your body. So your DNA actually starts to change and evolve. Literally activates and begins to change. The mind always wants to categorize and compare, but this book will work better for you if you do not attempt to compare its terminology with that of other teachings. Otherwise, you will probably become confused. confused. I use words such as mind, happiness, and consciousness in ways that do not necessarily correlate with other teachings. Don't get attached to any words. They are only stepping stones to be left behind as quickly as possible. When I occasionally quote the words of Jesus or the Buddha from A Course in Miracles or from other teachings, I wanted to do that, by the way. I wanted to do that Course in Miracles really bad. I do so not in order to compare, but to draw your attention to the fact that in essence there is and always has been only one spiritual teaching, although it comes in many forms. Some of these forms, such as the ancient religions, have become so overlaid with extraneous matter that their spiritual essence has become almost completely obscured by it. Right? To a large extent, therefore, their deeper meaning is no longer recognized and their transformative power lost. When I quote from the ancient religions or other teachings, it is to reveal their deeper meaning and thereby restore their transformative power, particularly for those readers who are followers of these religions or teachings. I say to them, there is no need to go elsewhere for the truth. Let me show you how to go more deeply into what you already have. Mostly, however, I have endeavored to use terminology that is as neutral as possible in order to reach a wide range of people. This book can be seen as a restatement for our time of that one timeless spiritual teaching, the essence of all religions. It is not derived from external sources, but from the one true source within. Source is capitalized. So it contains no theory or speculation. He is literally getting it from the one true source within because he's getting it straight from the source, I speak from inner experience, and if at times I speak forcefully, it is to cut through heavy layers of mental resistance and to reach that place within you where you already know, and that's italicized, and I underlined it. Just as I know, and where the truth is recognized when it is heard. There is then a feeling of exaltation and heightened aliveness as something within you says, yes, I know this is true. That's the end of the introduction. So I will stop the video there to take a break or whatever, bathroom break.